I invite you all to join in with me if you'd like as we sing the first verse to the Black National Anthem. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Thank you.
Note.
And the president of the Sims Foundation will read the prayer, and we're going to read the verse from Victory Voice and sing.
Let us pray. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, Thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, Thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path, we pray, lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land. Amen.
Amen.
Welcome. I'm Thelma Sims Dukes, fifth generation great-granddaughter of Private William Bill Sims and Judy Boatman Sims. It is a fine honor to be here with you today, honoring and commemorating these African Civil War soldiers of the 1st Mississippi Infantry, Company G, and their 2 white officers who were massacred at Ross Landing, Chicot County, Arkansas, on Wednesday, February the 14th, 1864. Remembering and saying their names is a powerful way to ensure that their legacy lives on. Not only were they soldiers, they were freedom fighters, former slaves, had seen the worst of the worst. They were fighting in a condition of resentment, hatred, racism, lower pay, more fatigue duty, used as shock troops, inadequate weapons, and sometimes no quarter as they received this massacre. We honor the ultimate sacrifice by saying their names. Today, after 160 years this past Wednesday, they are never going to be buried as unknowns. Dr. Beck Cruz, the National Park Service 2023 through 25 Andrew Mellon Scholar, has researched the massacre and written an article Massacre at Ross Landing. You can see it on your program, the website, which lists your program. It is a powerful article describing the event at Ross Landing. In addition, she has restored the African soldiers' names and regiments and deaths and most of the men's grave sites. The 1st Mississippi Infantry Company G was ordered to Ross Landing, Chicot County, Arkansas, to forage. On February the 14th, 1864, they were surprised by an unsanctioned 9th Missouri Cavalry band of 21 Confederate soldiers who had voted to go and attack the African soldiers. One of the African soldiers fired off one shot to warn the others of imminent danger. The Africans were equipped with one-shot muzzleloaders. They stood ready in line when the Confederates turned the corner of the gin house. They fired one round simultaneously. There was no time to reload. The Africans tried to retreat, but the mounted guerillas continued shooting with their Colt, Navy, and Dragoon revolvers, and they overwhelmed them. After the attack, the guerrilla unit, not satisfied with shooting the Africans in the back and leaving them late, dismounted, grabbed the Africans' rifles with bayonets, and pinned each African soldier to the ground. When the rest of Company G arrived, they buried 13 African soldiers and brought back to Vicksburg 7 wounded soldiers, including the 2 white officers who were signaled out for symbolic execution by the guerrillas. First Lieutenant Thaddeus Cox was shot through the mouth after surrendering and died in Vicksburg. First Sergeant James Spencer was killed in action. 3 members of Company G later died of their wounds in the hospital, but 2 lived, Privates Howard Dixon and Ruffian Epps, until 1918. In March 1968, after the Vicksburg National Park was established, cemetery was established in 1866, the 13 original soldiers buried in Arkansas were moved were moved to the Vicksburg National Cemetery in the segregated them section as unknowns. The 3 who died of their wounds in the hospital were also buried as unknowns. The 2 soldiers, Dixon and Ruffian Epps, who lived until 1918, grave sites are still unknown. The white officers' bodies were sent back to their families, where they received funerals, including headstones and inscriptions. The 2 officers' families knew where they were buried. They could tend their graves. First Lieutenant Thaddeus Cox, Ebertiata, bred in part. He died for his country, a martyr to the cause of freedom, a victim to the barbarism of slavery. This is also true of the men we honor and commemorate today.
Good afternoon. I am relieved to be a part of this. When Ms. Dukes called me, I was, blown away because I knew about the black soldiers because I've been in the park. I won $75 for being a tourist in the park, and it's just an honor to be here. I have been under the weather, and I just bear with me, but I will do my best to help our soldiers. One day, when the glory comes, it will be yours. It will be yours. Oh, one day, when the war is won, it will be ours. It will be ours. Oh, glory. Yes, glory. And the war is not finished. Victory isn't won, but we'll fight on to the finish. Then it's all done. We'll cry, glory, oh, glory, glory, glory. We'll cry, glory, oh, glory, yeah, yeah, glory.
Libation is going to be poured by Dr. Elmer Dorsey Jr., Associated History Professor at Jackson State University and a former Vicksburger.
Good afternoon. I have the privilege to say the names of the 1st Mississippi Infantry soldiers. As I pour out the water of libation in remembrance of all the United States colored troops, USCT soldiers who bravely fought and sacrificed their lives during the American Civil War, so that we all may live free. Ashe. To honor the soldiers, after each name, I want you to say Ashe, a West African Yoruba word that means so be it. Ashe. Private Henry Berry. Private Calvin Cathron. Private T. Howard Dixon. Corporal Fleming Epps. Private Raffian Epps. Private Peter Everman. Private Charles Farrar. Private Henry Ford. Private John Jennifer. Private Anthony Gibbons. Private Richard James. Sergeant Tony McGee. Sergeant Noah Howell. Private Thomas Ransom. First Sergeant James Spencer. Private Isaac Stanton. Private Isom Taylor. Corporal Nelson Walker. Private James H. Bolden. By saying their names today, we have entered them into the book of life. They will never be unknowns again. Ashe?
Our seventh generation, where the original uniforms did not reach here today. But we're going to move on with our sophomore, Vicksburg High School, Daniel Drake, obtained tax force. Good afternoon, and thank you all for your participation in honoring the first Mississippi African descent soldiers who gave the ultimate sacrifice in the battles of freedom. I also want to especially thank Thelma Dukes and the William Bill Sims Foundation for their continuing endeavors in recognizing the Mississippi and Louisiana USCT, including organizing today's ceremony. My remarks will be brief, but I will be around to answer any questions after the ceremony. I want to quickly highlight why I am at Vicksburg National Military Park. The chief reason a known fellow was placed here was due to the collapse of the African American sections of the cemetery. This catastrophic event brought to the forefront not only the number of unknown USCT buried here, but the overall absence of stories of the African American experience in Vicksburg from the Civil War through Reconstruction. I can testify that the history was recorded, and I am dedicated to reveal the hidden African American history relating to the Vicksburg National Military Park. While my NPS article, which I hope you've all read, reveals the brutality of their death today, I want to provide you with a glimpse into their lives before their fateful day at Ross's Landing. The lives of the enlisted men of Company G, who all joined the U.S. Army about 1 month after the Battle of Billikens Bend, is also hard history, and unsurprisingly corresponds to a famous set of trading cards published in 1863. This image is an uncut 12 illustrated cards
presenting the journey of an enslaved man from plantation life to the struggle for liberty, for which he gives his life as a Union soldier during the Civil War. I'm going to focus on 3 stages represented by 6 cards. But first, let me provide a few demographic information about these men. The average age of the soldiers attacked at Ross's Landing was 27. Private Thomas Ransom was the oldest at 42 years old. Privates Isaac Stanton and Henry Ford were the youngest at around 18. 3 of the 18 enlisted African American soldiers were skilled tradesmen. Peter Everman was a carpenter, Charles Farrar was a shoemaker, and Fleming Epps was a brick mason. Fleming Epps was also likely serving alongside his biological brother Ruffian. Both Eppses were born in Virginia. In fact, 11 of the 18 were born in the Upper South and were definitively part of the domestic slave trade represented in these 2 cards. The U.S. internal slave trade is referred to as the Second Middle Passage, and it occurred between the early 1800s until the Civil War. The white encroachment on Native American lands and the forced expulsion of the Native Americans meant white planters and slave traders forcefully relocated approximately 1 million enslaved people from the Upper South to the Deep South. The majority of the first African Americans transported to the Deep South were young, healthy men who were needed to clear the trees for the planting and harvesting of cotton. The Second Middle Passage ripped families apart. Henry Louis Gates Jr. recognizes that it was during this period that we think of the image of slaves being sold downriver on the auction blocks, where mothers were separated from children, husbands from their wives. The years between 1830 and 1860 were the worst in the history of the African American enslavement. 2/3 of the men killed or wounded at Ross's Landing survived the Second Middle Passage. Fleming and Ruffian Epps are also representative of another aspect regarding the institution of slavery, the sexual exploitation of the enslaved. Scholars estimate that 58% of all enslaved women between the ages of 15 and 30 were sexually assaulted by white men. Ruffian's military records are incomplete, but Fleming's death record reports his complexion as brown. In total, 5 of the 18 enlisted men included variations that explicitly imply white male lineage. What is often overlooked is the sexual exploitation of the men. Not only did the enslaver produce offspring with the enslaved women, he chose which enslaved males he wanted to pair with the enslaved women. These men's early death ensured that no records from them or whether they were forced to participate in slave marriages and create children against their will. But we can presume some of them were coerced into sexual relationships. On January 1st, 1863, President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which allowed for the inclusion of African American soldiers. Contrary to the narrative provided in past scholarship and represented in this card, the black man was not groveling for inclusion. The activism of both free blacks in the North and the enslaved people in the South forced Lincoln to respond to their demands with his proclamation. Free black men argued and petitioned for their right to join the fight for freedom. The enslaved people who could not petition the government took extreme risks and self-manumitted themselves by running away to Union lines. And contrary to lost cause loyal slave myths, these men were not coerced into joining the U.S. Army. They had choices. Some of those choices were to join military service and remain on the now U.S. government-controlled plantations as wage earners. Many chose the U.S. Army and took pride in claiming civil rights as citizen soldiers. The men of Company G also demonstrated their abilities to be leaders of the U.S. Army. Bolden, Fleming Epps, Everman, and Walker were corporals at enlistment. McGee and Powell were enlisted as sergeants. Private Howard Dixon, who survived the event, mustered out as a sergeant, while Corporal Bolden likely struggled with surviving the massacre and was demoted to a private. He did possibly die of his Ross Landing wounds in 1866. Ruffian Epps, once he healed, served for the remainder of the war as an orderly at the regimental headquarters. The survivors, Ruffian Epps and Howard Vixen, applied for military pensions. I plan on obtaining them in the future, and these will likely reveal more details about their service and the massacre. I do want to note that this research on this massacre is ongoing. As a matter of fact, the other day I discovered some more information, and I will be updating the website in the coming weeks. To be sure, the USCT held no misconceptions about the cruelty of the Southern men, and they were completely aware of the slavery supporters' rhetoric regarding their fate should they be captured on the battlefield. Approximately 100,000 African American men enlisted in the United States colored troops of the secession states, even though they faced the threat of execution for servile insurrection. The deep rage of Southern soldiers encountering the African American soldiers resulted in Civil War massacres like Ross's Landing. The fury also carried over to the white officers. Lieutenant Thaddeus Cox and First Sergeant James Spencer were denigrated before their execution. The officers were stripped of their uniforms, forced to kneel on the ground, and shot at the head at point-blank range. First Sergeant Spencer died on the field, and his body was brought back to Vicksburg to be shipped home. Lieutenant Cox suffered for days before succumbing to his head wound. I'll also note that they stole the lieutenant's saber, and it is out there somewhere to this day, and it's engraved with his name. Should we ever find it, we would like to have it back. But this was the price that the white officers paid for the Confederates who claimed was inciting servile insurrection. In conclusion, the U.S. soldiers of Company G, 1st Mississippi Infantry, African descent, gave the ultimate sacrifice for the nation, not just for their freedom, but for the freedom of nearly 4 million enslaved African Americans. For these soldiers, it was not abstract ideology. They knew what it was to be unfree. And even though we do not know what the 1st Mississippi Infantry African descent flag looked like, there is no doubt they too believed in the motto of the 3rd USCT. They'd rather die freemen than live to be slaves. So now, 160 years later, we can acknowledge the victims of Ross's Landing. And as President Lincoln remarked of the Gettysburg dead, we too can recognize the men who lay the hallowed grounds of the Vicksburg National Cemetery and never forget what they did for freedom.
Now we have their short flags. Be sure to say a few words just about Vicksburg.
Say the names. You know, somewhere I read what Dr. Martin Luther King said, we're not makers of the history. We're made by history. Somewhere I read that it is always right to do what's right. To Ms. Stokes and to all of you that are here today, I have witnessed something. As mayor of this city, I'm so honored and proud to stand here before you today to witness this true story. My daddy could not read and write, and he would send us to this park. And that's my relationship to this park, to read monuments and come back and tell me, well, Daddy, I can no longer say unknown. I can give you those names that were read here today before me as mayor of this city. I can do that. Thanks you for the research. You know, I text out this morning that knowledge is power, and it is. And I say that to you, Ms. Stokes, I say this to your organization, I say this to everybody. Today is the beginning of history that never been told like this before. We see in the Mississippi legislature, they gave us $2 million to acquire some land. They'll come build and interpret the something. About $100 and some million right here in Vicksburg. So you know why? So we can tell the full story, not the whole story, but the full story about what happened. Next year, 2025, we're gonna celebrate Vicksburg birthday. And we want to celebrate it in a way that's never been celebrated before. We want the whole story, the full story to be told right here. And Ms. Du, you have a place at the table. A place at the table because of your steadfastness, because of your braveness, have stood the test of time. And you, for the research, and I felt your pain for you to have to do what you did. And Dr. Douglas, then for you to read those names here in Vicksburg. I'm so honored to bring you greetings from the Mayor Board of the city of Vicksburg and say to you that this is a new beginning.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the National Park Service, I can just say how humbled I am to be here and how honored we are to be able to help support these things. I'll also say on behalf of the National Park Service that we are committed to this type of programming, this type of research. We are committed to saying that these stories will not remain unforgotten. That we will tell this whole story, that we will continue to restore the names of others. And when we tell these stories, we're doing something more than just honoring their deaths. Because if we all take a moment to think about our loved ones, about ourselves, when we define who we are, we're not fully defining ourselves by our moments of death, but it's how we lived. And so today, we're not only honoring that these men made the ultimate sacrifice in the fight for freedom, we're also celebrating these men's lives and what they did while they were alive. These were men of action. As Dr. Cruz said, they had choices in life, and they chose to take action and make a difference. They chose to say that they would rise above the oppression that they were constantly challenged and they struggled with. And so today, as we continue this effort to tell these undertold stories, again, we're not only honoring that moment when they made that ultimate sacrifice, but everything they did to carry on this quest for freedom. And it brings to mind the words of another U.S. Army veteran from Mississippi, Medgar Evers, when he said, "You can kill a man, but you can't kill an idea." And through these men, Ross Landing, the idea of freedom continues on.
The William V. Sims Foundation and the presenters of this program and the African community thank the Vicksburg National Park for this opportunity to commemorate our African Civil War soldiers. We thank the Park Service for this new direction in acknowledging the omissions by confronting the realities of the past, by inserting the African soldier's history into the narrative of the park. Special thanks to Superintendent Carrie Murdoch, Chief Interpreter who was just out, Brendan Wilson, Dr. Bess Cruz, she's our researcher. Thank you very much for your superior scholarship. Is John, come on down. He's the one who's taking care of our disinterred guys that they had to, disinterred soldiers that they had to repair the terraces and their grave sites. And he's watching over these guys. I don't know how many he does. He'll tell me about it.
What's the name again?
John,
John Schweikler, but John is fine.
that's it. I think someone does.
Well, Thelma, thank you so much. It is an absolute honor to be here with all of you, and I will keep my statements very short because you've heard some very eloquent things from our co-conspirators, as my colleague Brendan Wilson would say. But I want to talk about the divine contract as a starting point. What I mean by that is every one of us in this room, all of these individuals buried in our national cemetery, were given this divine contract. We were given this gift of life. Many of us here have had many decades of life to cherish our loved ones, to enjoy a sunset, to have a wonderful meal with friends. These individuals from Ross Landing, their lives were cut short, very short, but they still were given that gift of life in that contract for one reason, the same reason every one of us is held to, and that is to make a difference. And so these individuals were buried. Their identities were equally buried, but they have come back and they were bringing a charge to us. And that charge, again, is to make a difference. And as Dr. Cruz mentioned, we are all here because of a reason. And it's a reason, again, brought to us an obligation that when that landslide fell, in those two sections that were designated for our United States colored trees, that was then issuing every one of us a calling to be responsible. That is why I am here. I was brought in to manage that project, but I cannot do that. There are, at this point, getting quite close to 100 individuals or more that have been systematically disinterred from that cemetery since April of last year. And that has been done by archaeologists working through the heat, working 5-6 days a week, dealing with rain, dealing with complexities that typically archaeologists do not have to deal with. And so I want to give a special recognition to my colleagues from Chronicle Heritage who are here for their continuing work in bringing that story and honoring these individuals. So thank you. And to add to this is that we are honoring these men from Ross Landing, but this story is much, much broader. And the individuals that are being systematically disinterred, we are looking at the whole breadth of the human being. We are looking at men of fighting age. We are looking at adult women. We are looking at children, and we are even looking at individuals who did not have the opportunity to be born. They are all coming to light from this work in the cemetery. This is extremely moving, and the stories they are being given to us are not what people associate the Veterans Cemetery. So history is not only something that has happened at Vicksburg, history is happening in Vicksburg right now. And to keep this story going, there needs to be flame keepers, people who hold that flame and are committed to passing it on to the next generation. And that is all of you in this room. That is everybody. You were brought to this ceremony for a reason. Whether you just heard about it 5 minutes ago, or you have devoted your life to telling the story. But either way, every one of us has an obligation that the next generation is going to carry these stories forward. There has been too much sacrifice, too much that has come in the way and prevented this from being at the forefront. Because quite frankly, the Vicksburg story does not make any sense without the role of the African Americans who were lock, stock, and barrel central to everything that happened here. And yet, Park Service, you see the park, that is hard to see that. But we are moving in a positive direction. We need to keep that flame moving forward. So as the mayor mentioned, the 125th anniversary of the existence of the national park is coming up this week, on the 21st of February. There was a conscious effort when that park was created to exclude the African American story from it. For the next 125 years, we need to reverse that. We need to put that African American story right at the center where it belongs. And so all of this, in my opinion, centers on the concept of heritage justice. It is not the park's role to be the purveyor of this information, to decide what stories get told and what doesn't get told. What we need to do is accept our role as co-patriots, and we need to let that voice of the people of Vicksburg and the communities here be the center stage. And so, as you go forward, realize you are a flame keeper. You have a role to play in passing this generation on to this story on to the next generation. Because this really is the only way we can let that significance of Vicksburg shine in its true light. So I'm honored you are all here, and this is probably one of the most important things I have done in my life. And I hope it is important and dear to your souls as well. So thank you.
You know, I want to skip over and have a bit down. Thank you so much for coming, because this is one of my proudest moments too. March 11th wasn't bad either, John. We did another program where we disinterred the African soldiers. Thank you for coming.